Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Compliance Online live webinar, How to Prepare a Standard Operating Procedures. Our speaker for today is Dr. Afsana Mohammad Kasrani. He's a medical and scientific affairs expert and a senior scientist with a strong background in biomedical science and clinical trial research. She has a tenured and diverse range of experience in medical affairs, basic and industrial clinical research and development, clinical trials, medical and regulatory writing, and intellectual property.
Which is the outline of the presentation for today. Basically, first I'm going to go over the definition of SOP and to discuss the importance, benefits, and limitations of it. And then I'm going to elaborate on the optimal number of SOPs you need to have in each company, SOP topics, and some of the examples that I will have for you. We are going to go into details next to review the steps to develop an SOP. And those steps include the items I have listed here: process mapping, authoring, formatting and language, editing, authorizing, training, implementation, revision or archiving, or version control. Now let's see what is an SOP. In terms of definition, the International Conference on Harmonization, or ICH, has defined an SOP as detailed written instructions to achieve uniformity of the performance of a specific function. So based on this definition, also we have a similar definition is in ICH GCP 1.55. It was basically founded in the Federal Regulations Guidelines known as GXP. And what it does, it lists general practical information that you need in order to follow throughout a certain process or procedure, and should not generally be too detailed. Now let me explain why it should not be too detailed. First of all, as we discuss later, all the SOPs in any company should be regularly reviewed and updated if needed. SOPs are not specifically mentioned in the FDA regulations. Guidance that infer the need for it can be found in 21 CFR 312.53. The investigator will ensure that all associates, colleagues, and employees assisting in the conduct of the study are informed of their obligations in meeting the above commitment. This just infers to having an SOP. And see why they are important documents for each company. So fulfill their compliance obligations. SOPs practice product and put forward the procedure to fulfill the compliance in terms of regulatory compliance. Secondly, they are helpful in maintaining operational efficacy. The way the SOPs do this is to ensure uniform process flow for an optimized result, which is irrelevant to the location or the performer. So in any case, you should get the same result. And thirdly, they are essential documents in training staff. Basically, the way SOPs do this is to help in training staff in a uniform manner in order to optimize the quality of the product or the study. That we have defined the SOPs and discussed their importance, let's focus on the benefits. First of all, it makes sure that there is a documented step-by-step procedure on how to do things effectively in order to get optimized results. This will help in minimizing the chance of mistakes while you're performing important procedures in your company that is related to your product. Secondly, having an SOP also enhances the awareness of and working knowledge in general. Doesn't matter in what area you're working. It basically guarantees that all employees can familiarize themselves with the knowledge that they need in order to fulfill their job. Then having SOPs also helps in standardization of common procedure and processes at a company-wide level, which is very important. And also, if you have proper number of SOPs in place, it is very helpful in the maintenance of a certain level of accountability, basically, for the performers with minimum resource use. Up to this point, we have explained all the good stuff about SOPs, but as anything else in this world, there are some limitations for it as well. So now let's explore and see what are the limitations of SOPs. So the first thing is SOPs are only helpful if you follow them. And so it is not just enough to create them and have them. You need to make sure they are being followed by all the people it applies to. And second thing is, if you add too much details in an SOP, it can work against you by taking too much time from you to update for every single change in the procedure and for a small modification of the procedure. So you don't want to do that. Now, a number of important SOP types that I have listed here in this slide. Fundamental procedures in a company can be an SOP, methodologies, safety precautions can be an SOP, operating instructions, apparatus, equipment handling and maintenance procedures, analytical methods, reagent preparation, sample receiving and registration procedure, quality assurance, and finally archiving or complaint handling. These are all samples of SOP or types of SOP. The number of SOPs that you need for your company differ depending on the type of company, the activity type, also on the geographical location of the company, which affects regulations depending on which regulatory body you need to follow, difficulty of the procedure, and finally steps that are involved in the procedure from the beginning to the end. The number of SOPs can vary anywhere between 1 to a few thousand depending on the factors I just mentioned. And as an example, research teams should have SOPs to cover the following topics. At a minimum, they should have SOP for recruitment and retention of participants, another one for informed consent procedure or process, another one for filing and record keeping, an SOP for IRB review, which in this SOP you need to provide appropriate level of detail for the initial review, IRB modifications, and continuing reviews. Then you need to have another SOP for protocol review, basically documenting, resolving, and reporting protocol, deviations and violations, adverse events, and unanticipated results or problems. A study closure, and finally, they need to have the SOP for SOPs, which is an 8-fold SOPs process that we will discuss in upcoming slides. Okay, now let's talk about SOPs and guidelines. Some SOPs have a two-tiered system that includes SOPs and the guidelines. So SOPs provide a general view of all the main steps, and the guidelines provide significantly more details in continuation of that specific SOP. SOPs provide a general view of all the main steps, and the guideline provides significantly more details that can be followed, and still you can avoid the need to update the SOP because it's in a guideline and you don't need, it's not a regulated document, so you don't need to update it every time you change. There is generally an 8-fold process involved in developing an SOP. These steps are listed here in this slide and include process mapping, authoring, formatting a language, editing, authorizing, training, implementation, and finally revision and archiving. And we are going to elaborate on each of these steps in the next few slides to give you a better idea how to develop an SOP. The summary, SOPs are tools to mainly guarantee efficiency and compliance. You can use the 8-fold SOP process that we just discussed in order to properly and effectively develop the SOPs. SOPs should be regularly used and followed. They should be regularly reviewed as well and updated if needed. And finally, all the staff using a specific SOP should be trained on it, and it has to be documented properly that you trained them.